I never imagined my life would turn into a sitcom about a crazy HOA president. But here we are. My name is Mark, and until about 6 months ago, I was living the dream in my downtown apartment. My remote software engineering job kept me busy, and city life kept me entertained. That all changed when my uncle passed away and left me his place in the Willow Creek Estates community. It was a fantastic house, 3 bedrooms, a big yard, and quiet streets shaded by these huge, old maple trees. The only catch, the homeowners association, run by a woman named Patricia Stern. From the moment I moved in, Patricia just seemed to have it out for me. Maybe it was my age. At 32, I was definitely younger than most of the residents. Maybe it was my slightly rusty Subaru compared to the fancy SUVs everyone else seemed to drive. Or maybe it was just that I hadn't, in her eyes, earned my place in her precious Willow Creek Estates through the traditional route of a massive mortgage and country club membership. Whatever the reason, Patricia made it crystal clear I wasn't exactly welcome. My first run-in with her was on moving day itself. I was wrestling boxes off a rental truck when she marched up my driveway, her navy blazer and power pearls bouncing with each step. "Excuse me," she announced, not even bothering with an introduction. Moving trucks are only permitted between 9 a.m. and 4 p.m. on weekdays. I checked my watch. It was 4:45 p.m. on a Saturday. Before I could say a word, she shoved a booklet at me. HOA Bylaws, page 182, section 5, paragraph 3. I suggest you familiarize yourself with the rules before you continue to violate them. I took a breath and tried to smile. "Hi, I'm Mark Miller, Robert Miller's nephew. This used to be his house." At the mention of my uncle, who I later learned was a pillar of the community, her expression flickered, just for a second. "I'll definitely look over the regulations, but I really need to finish unloading today. The truck has to be back by 7. Patricia's lips tightened into a thin line. "Rules are rules, Mr. Miller. I'll let it slide this time, seeing as you're new. But the HOA takes violations very seriously." With that, she spun on her heel and marched off, already pulling out her phone to, I assumed, call in reinforcements about the new neighborhood menace who dared to move in on a Saturday afternoon. Little did I know, that was just the opening shot in what would become a full-blown war of attrition. Over the next few weeks, the violation notices started rolling in for the most ridiculous things. My recycling bin was left out at the curb for an extra hour after pickup. My hedges were apparently aesthetically displeasing because they weren't perfectly symmetrical. And apparently, the wind chimes on my back porch were non-compliant auditory devices. I handled each notice with excessive politeness, trying not to make waves. When I got the official letter about the recycling bin, I made sure to bring it in the second the truck was down the street. For the hedge complaint, I hired a landscaping service specifically approved by the HOA. And reluctantly, I took down the wind chimes. Even though I kind of liked them through it all, I kept up a friendly demeanor, even when Patricia herself would cruise by my house in her black Lexus SUV, slowing to a crawl as she clearly scanned for any new infractions. Things really ramped up about 2 months after I moved in. I decided to repaint my home office, which faced the street. The old color was this drab, institutional beige that made the room feel like a doctor's office from the 70s. I chose a calming, light sage green that I thought would be good for focus during work. I checked the HOA guidelines and confirmed that exterior colors needed approval, but interior colors weren't mentioned. I spent a weekend painting, and by Sunday night, the office looked amazing. I went to bed feeling good and ready for the work week. Monday morning, I was on a video call with clients when the doorbell started ringing like crazy. Apologizing to my colleagues, I went to answer it. Patricia was standing there, arms crossed, face red. "Your window is visible from the street, and that color is not on the approved exterior palette. she declared. No hello, no preamble. I blinked, genuinely confused. Patricia, it's an interior wall. The guidelines only mention exterior colors needing approval. She scoffed as if I'd said the sky was purple. If it's visible from any public area, it falls under exterior appearance regulations. Page 28, Section 9. She peered past me into my house. You'll need to repaint immediately. I've already scheduled a special board meeting for this evening to discuss your violation. My legendary patience started to wear thin. I'm in the middle of a work call. Can we discuss this later? This is a priority, Mr. Miller. The integrity of our community aesthetic is at stake. The way she said it, you'd think I'd painted a giant mural of a clown. I'll review the guidelines again and get back to you, I said firmly, starting to close the door. But right now, I need to get back to my meeting. Her foot shot out, blocking the door. This needs immediate attention. Patricia, I interrupted, my voice level but firm. I am working. I will address this after business hours. Please remove your foot from my doorway. Something dangerous flashed in her eyes. Pure outrage that someone would dare set a boundary with her. Slowly, she pulled her foot back. The board meets at 7 p.m. I suggest you attend if you want any input on the repainting schedule. With that, she turned and stalked down my walkway. Phone already glued to her ear, I slammed the door, took a deep breath, and went back to my meeting, apologizing again for the interruption. That evening, I reread the entire HOA guidelines. Still nothing about interior paint visible from outside. Nevertheless, I went to the emergency board meeting that night, where I was treated to a 45-minute lecture by Patricia about community cohesion and property value preservation. The other 3 board members sat there looking deeply uncomfortable but completely unwilling to contradict their fearless leader. When I finally got a chance to speak, I calmly pointed out that the guidelines didn't mention interior colors. I also presented photos I'd quickly snapped of several other houses in the community with definitely non-beige rooms visible through windows. The board members exchanged glances, and finally, a timid guy named David suggested that perhaps the guidelines could be clarified for future reference, but that my office color could stay. Patricia looked like David had suggested we all have a bonfire of the HOA rulebooks. The meeting ended with a grudging agreement that I wouldn't have to repaint, but Patricia's death glare as I left made it clear this was not over. The following week, the notices kept coming. My welcome mat was apparently too brightly colored. The decorative rocks in my front garden were unapproved landscaping elements, and the potted herbs I had on my back patio were excessive vegetation. I had 3 pots of herbs. I addressed each complaint, meticulously following the guidelines, but I also started documenting everything. I had a feeling I might need proof of this harassment eventually. And boy, was I right that that's when the accidents started. First, my mailbox was knocked clean off its post, which seemed a little weird since it was pretty solid. Then, the decorative rocks from my front garden were scattered all over the lawn. My outdoor solar lights were smashed. Each time, I cleaned up the mess, replaced what was broken, and then I installed security cameras. Yeah, after the mailbox incident, I invested in a decent system that covered every angle of my property. They were small, discreet, and gave crystal clear footage, even at night. I didn't mention them to anyone. No HOA rule against security cameras, and I made sure they were as unobtrusive as possible. Each new incident was captured from multiple angles, but the person was always just out of frame or hidden by a hoodie and baseball cap. About 4 months after moving in, I came home from a grocery run to find my front window shattered, glass everywhere, and a big landscaping rock sitting right in the middle of my living room floor. I called the police immediately. Officer Ramirez arrived in about 20 minutes, took my statement, and looked around. "Any idea who might have done this, sir?" he asked. notepad in hand. I hesitated. I've been having some issues with the HOA president, but I don't have any proof she'd go this far. Officer Ramirez raised an eyebrow. HOA disputes can get ugly. We see it more often than you'd think. He glanced around. Any security cameras? I nodded. Several. I'll review the footage and forward anything relevant. After he left, I swept up the glass, boarded up the window, and sat down at my computer. The footage was enlightening. At 2:30 p.m., while I was at the grocery store, a figure in a navy blazer and sunglasses had walked right up my driveway, looked around real quick, then hurled a rock through my front window before hurrying away in the direction of, surprise, Patricia's house, just a few doors down. I forwarded the footage to Officer Ramirez with a detailed email. Then, I did something that might seem a little crazy. I waited. I didn't confront Patricia. I didn't tell the neighbors. I just had the window replaced and went about my life as if nothing had happened. 2 weeks later, it happened again. This time, it was my kitchen window while I was out for a morning jog. Same landscaping rock through the window. Same navy blazer-clad figure making a hasty retreat toward Patricia's place. I called Officer Ramirez directly this time and sent him the new footage. Again, I quietly replaced the window and waited. Third time's the charm, right? It was a Tuesday evening, and I'd casually mentioned to a few gossipy neighbors that I was heading to a neighborhood watch meeting that night. Not the HOA, just a more informal community group. In reality, I parked a few blocks away, walked back through the woods behind my house, and slipped in through my back door. I sat in my darkened kitchen watching my security feeds. Sure enough, at 7:40 p.m., Patricia appeared at the edge of my property. This time, she had a small bag with her. She pulled out not one, but 3 rocks of varying sizes. As she wound up for the first throw, aiming at my newly replaced kitchen window, I stepped outside, phone in hand, already dialing 911. "Good evening, Patricia," I said calmly. She froze mid-throw, rock still clutched in her manicured hand. "Mark, I was just preparing to vandalize my home for the 3rd time." I finished, my voice steady. "The dispatcher would like to know if we need officers to respond immediately, or if you'll wait peacefully until they arrive." Her face twisted with rage and disbelief. "You have no proof of anything." I smiled slightly. 6 security cameras might suggest otherwise, plus the matching footage from the previous 2 incidents. The officers are particularly interested in the pattern of behavior. As if on cue, police lights flashed at the end of the street. Patricia dropped the rocks and made a move to run. "I wouldn't," I advised. "Fleeing the scene will just add to the charges." Officer Ramirez was among the responding officers. After reviewing my security footage on site and taking Patricia's sputtering statement, where she somehow tried to frame her actions as community protection, she was handcuffed and put in a police car. The neighbors, many returning from the same meeting I was supposedly attending, gathered in small groups, watching the whole thing with wide eyes and urgent whispers. As Patricia was driven away, David from the board hurried over to me. "Mark, I am so sorry. We had no idea she was doing this." "Didn't you?" I asked mildly. "She's been openly hostile since I moved in. The board has approved every punitive measure she suggested, for real or imagined infractions. At what point did anyone consider that her behavior might be the problem?" David actually looked ashamed. "You're right. We've all been too afraid of getting on her bad side. The things she's done to people who crossed her." He shuddered. Over the next few days, the story flew around Willow Creek Estates. Neighbors I barely knew stopped by with cookies and apologies. I learned Patricia had been terrorizing residents for years, towing cars for being an inch over the driveway line, fining people for unapproved Halloween decorations, even sending nasty letters to a family whose kid laughed too loud in their own backyard. Patricia was charged with multiple counts of vandalism, trespassing, and harassment. The evidence was overwhelming, not just from my security footage, but from the flood of residents who came forward once she was arrested. She took a plea deal that included probation, community service, restitution to me and other victims, and a restraining order barring her from contacting me or entering Willow Creek Estates for 5 years. The HOA board, now led by David, got a complete overhaul. The crazy rules were revised, a transparent violation process was put in place, and community input was actually welcomed for major decisions. The tension that had hung over the neighborhood just lifted. People actually started talking to each other instead of just reporting each other. As for me, I repainted my office a slightly brighter sage green, put my wind chimes back up, and added 2 more pots of herbs to my patio. 6 months after the arrest, Willow Creek Estates held its first community block party in over a decade. I brought homemade guacamole and chips. As I chatted with neighbors who were now actually friends, David approached with a lemonade. "You know," he said, "Patricia always claimed she was protecting property values with all her rules and enforcement. Ironically, since she's been gone and we've created a more welcoming community, home prices have actually gone up. Turns out, people are willing to pay more to live somewhere they won't be terrorized by their neighbors." Who would have thought? I smiled, looking around at the kids playing, the relaxed adults, the general good vibes. "Sometimes the best security isn't cameras or rules," I said. "It's a community where people actually care about each other." David raised his glass. "Well, security cameras helped," he chuckled. "Without them, we might never have known what was really going on." I clinked my glass against his. "To Patricia," I said, "in a weird way, without her, we might never have realized how much better things could be." We laughed, and I joined a group of neighbors discussing plans for a community garden on the previously unused HOA land behind my house. As the sun set over Willow Creek Estates, I felt truly at home for the first time since moving in. Sometimes the most satisfying revenge isn't getting someone punished. It's building something better from the mess they made. Though I have to admit, the security camera footage of Patricia's face when she realized she'd been caught, that was pretty satisfying too.